Good day and welcome to all the attendees to the webinar. It's my great pleasure to announce this release of the Palantir PlanningSpace and to have the time and the opportunity to present this webinar to you, which will be highlighting some of the key new features as well as giving an overview to Palantir and to the PlanningSpace as a whole. In general, PlanningSpace is an integrated software platform that's used for all aspects of oil and gas planning. And as Stephanie mentioned, specifically around the capital allocation, the reserves evaluation reporting, and the determination of financial earnings forecasts. We'll switch into the little brief PowerPoint presentation. It'll give us a bit of introduction to the topics. First of all, for those of you who don't know Palantir and haven't met us before, Palantir is a software and consulting company focused on oil and gas planning. It's our objective to make planning processes more effective. And we do that by applying our deep industry expertise and experience in combination with cutting-edge software and tools to come up with new theories and techniques and technologies in ways to approach all aspects of oil and gas planning problems. And we believe that it's critical to do this because of the increasing risk and uncertainty that the industry faces in its forward-looking investments. And really we're just looking at trying to change the way companies think about planning and their forward-looking investment portfolios, and just to come up with new ways to do so that are reflective of the contemporary challenges in investments, which are bigger projects, more integration of projects, and most predominantly a high degree of or high contribution of resource plays or unconventional projects into people's portfolios. So who do we work with? Typically Palantir works with companies that have either international portfolios or complex projects or both. Most of our companies are on the larger side. They're large independents all the way up to super majors, but we do have a number of smaller companies or niche or focus players that we work with as well. But they all share the common trait of having relatively complex portfolios. And almost all of them have pushed the limits of Excel and PowerPoint and are looking to get to the next stage of maturity in their planning processes. So we're really wanting people to work with people who are wanting to reduce cutting and pasting, reduce ad hoc tools, and smooth over links to existing systems and connecting that data and making it a smoother transition from third-party tools into their core planning tools or the PlanningSpace. So the PlanningSpace is software technology. It's a multi-tier platform. It's cloud ready. It's our next generation of software, and it recommends our continuing commitment of investing in oil and gas planning and software over the past decade and more. It's a truly integrated platform. It's the first time we've had all of our workspaces together in a single database standard, and that makes it a lot easier for us to streamline the steps between the allocation of capital and the reserves management and the earnings forecasting. As we said, it's cloud enabled. That makes it easier for us to deploy it on an enterprise basis to global and diverse geographic areas. And it's infinitely extendable. So we can have any number of third-party tools feeding the system or reading and taking information from the system. So why did we build it? Well, we're told that integration is extremely important to people. People want to be able to come to one place to handle all of their planning needs, whether that's one company, one system, and one application. And that's really what Palantir has been working to provide. Right? This enables processes to become more automated, more repeatable, more reliable, and generally more responsive to the changing conditions in today's commercial environment. Right? And ultimately, especially these days in a lower price environment, just being able to reduce the total cost of ownership. And that makes it easier to implement, less configuration up front, lower footprint from an IT perspective, and more extensible. So getting more use of this system and the existing systems that are in place. So we come to an overview of the software. There's 5 main workspaces within the PlanningSpace. We start at portfolio, reserves, financials. Those are the 3 core workflow areas. And then we have the foundational tools, which are the economics and data flow. And those 2 tools are involved in really any of the other 3 workflows, generally speaking. Now they all work off the same platform, and so on the right-hand side we can see how workflows cycle between the different tools, and that'll become very apparent as we move to the software demonstration, which is coming up next. So let me move out of PowerPoint, and I'll find my browser. So here we have Internet Explorer, typical browser, and really I've accessed the PlanningSpace through this single icon. And this is a major difference from the previous version, which had several applications and ways to enter the system. We now have a single point of entry, and that single point of entry takes me into the core workspace. We'll give it a second to start up. And we see that we've landed at the home page. All of the different workspaces are loaded and available. I have rights to all of the applications within the PlanningSpace, and so I see all of these in bold colors. If my security rights prevented me from working in financials, for example, that would be just a bit more dull, grayed out type of color, which would indicate that I would need different security permissions to access that part of the PlanningSpace. So today what we're going to do is walk through a workflow that starts with the data input, data collection, moves through economics, the reserves, financials, and finishes in the portfolio piece. So we'll be starting from the left and moving to the right. So we'll start by going into the data flow part of PlanningSpace, and it quickly takes me to a dashboard, and this dashboard has 4 key areas that allow me to understand recent activities or things that I do frequently, or certain tasks that are outstanding that I need to be addressing or taking care of. So here we have favorites, and so I've saved a few different projects that I'm going to frequently in preparation for this webinar. We also have the recent documents, and you can see where I've been in the past few days in preparing for this. We have workflows, and these are tasks that may be assigned to me. They could be approvals, they could be things for review, and a series of actions, and I can trigger these, so it's helped driving my workflows and reminding me of what I need to be providing to the rest of my teammates who are accessing the system. There's also a map layer that allows me to interact with the data in a different way, turn on different layers, and see the relationship between different aspects of my portfolio, whether it's field locations or could even be rig locations or land positions. So that's a very interesting tool. On the left-hand side, we have what we call the corporate hierarchy. Now, it allows me to manage different versions or different sets of data that may or may not be related. So the version concept allows me to have multiple historical views of my data here, as for example in these reserves year-end reviews. I've got portfolio views, and I could also have side data sets that are unrelated to my core portfolio that are still inside the system but are being used for a different purpose. For this webinar, we've prepared a data set or a version called 16.1 webinar, and I'm going to use that for the remainder of the webinar. Now the hierarchy is organized into, as the name suggests, a hierarchy structure. Now that structure can represent the organizational reporting structure. It could be one or more companies. In this case, we're looking at a demonstration company that representative of a large international operator, a large independent, somebody like an Anadarko or maybe a large Apache, or maybe the combination of the two. Now, we're going to focus today's webinar in the United Kingdom area, and you can see I drill down from the continent level to the country to the area and get down to a field level. And the field that we're going to be focusing on today is the McDuff field. And we can see here that I have a couple of different development options that represent 2 different views of what's possible with that field. Right. But if I was in a different part of my hierarchy, in the US for example, I might be drilling down to a different level of detail, and in that case, in these Texas opportunities, we see that we can drill right down to the well level. Right. And there's no limit to the number of wells that we can be modeling here. There could be hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands. But for today we're going to focus on this offshore field that would have some, it's from the UK North Sea, but it would have similarities to any offshore field in the Gulf of Mexico or offshore West Africa, Southeast Asia, or otherwise. So when I open this project up, it loads the data flow template. Now the data flow template is focused on the collection, the compilation of the data, and also managing the different revisions and the different scenarios that the data might be used for. Here we see a bunch of a series of sections that are collecting general or descriptive information about the project. We have location information and descriptive information. We have information on the asset team and the people who are involved in managing this asset. We have some working interest or some risking probability of success information. And we also have some equity or working interest information as well, so some commercial descriptions of the project. If there's any supporting documentation or files, maps, logs, files, they could be attached here, or links could be set here as well, so that we can see the source of where some of that information comes from. On the right-hand side, we have information that's more around the project maturity. So there's hydrocarbon maturation or reserves information that's been assigned, and this is categorization or description of where this is in its life cycle. From the project management perspective, we see a series of phase gates that are either have been achieved or that are upcoming. And we also have some information regarding the resources. Here's an assignment of a rig to this project, but we could also have other manpower and equipment resources that are added to this template if that's what we wish to track. So that's the metadata or descriptive data associated with this project. And then we get more into the detailed data that is used to build up the economic view of the project. We'll start with production, and we see here that Dataflow has a grid-like interface that allows us to manage the input of the data. Now these are summary variables that are defined by expression using some of the sub-variables that are on this template. And that in this way it's very similar to the way that people use Excel for collecting information related to planning. As we go down further, we can see that we have a couple of revenue streams, each for liquids and gas. And there's no real limit to the number of revenue streams we could track. We could have 3, 4, 5 liquids, 3, 4, 5 gas. We could also have other streams of production, so CO2 or other associated byproducts. We could have electricity generation, or we could have things that are really related to more of the midstream, downstream areas of the planning process. So it's a very flexible tool and allows us to capture any information we want. As we carry on, we see that the CapEx tab, that's a key tab, and in this case, this template is focused on collecting capital types that are typically associated with offshore projects. And we can see that these have been selected so that really the users have what they need to input the information that's important and only that. Right? There's not a whole series of capital types that are unrelated to this type of project. That simplifies the input, makes it easier to maintain, makes it easier to use from a user perspective. Likewise, operating costs have a series of specific categories, both fixed and variable, that can be inputted. And then we get into the calculation areas. Now the first thing that we want to highlight, and this is a new feature for 16.1, is the ability to embed Excel economics into a Dataflow template. So here we have two areas, an input area. Now these inputs have been connected into the Excel sheet so that it's dynamic. As I change these values, right, if I wanted to change price, for example, right, it would update and my results come back instantly after being calculated with the Excel sheet. Right. The results come back from certain sections of the Excel sheet that are defined by the user. And we can see how that's done using this sample Excel model where we have some of the key terms and presentation of the results. But the input tab has been connected to the data flow variables through this unique function. It says get periodic data, and it uses this name to look up from Dataflow to pull the input value in automatically. As we go through the calculations, we can see this is just really a well-built spreadsheet, typical of what's used on day-to-day in many companies. And as we go along, its flexibility is it is Excel. It's the same calculation logic and the same capability. And these result ranges are the ones that are linked back to the result variables using these expressions. and it's just the reverse process. So there's a two-way link to this Excel sheet, and effectively forms an Excel model that's connected to this project. Now for this webinar, we've chosen to show a second way of defining the economics for those companies who want to use a corporate tool or corporate level economics. In this case, we're using PlanningSpace economics, and it's using a technology that we call DFX. And this is just Palantir's proprietary scripting language that's a high-level version of Excel macros. Now we see here that we have the same inputs, in this case price, and it's linked to the price that we adjusted on the first sheet. The inputs, there's a lot more detail about what's connected into this template, and for the most part these are linked into other parts of the spreadsheet. Now to calculate the economics, I really just need to make sure I'm connected to the right fiscal regime, that I have the right assumptions or terms that are associated with this field. And once that's done, I can calculate it, and it'll automatically generate the results and update the sheet. And we saw that color change indicating that these are now current results. Now when I save this project, I'm doing a number of things at the same time. First of all, I'm creating a change record. If I choose, I could be indicating a potential reason why that might affect my reserve bookings, and I can also tell different reasons as to why this is being used. So this might be my year-end reserves, and it may be also the case I want to use for my business plan 16. So know that that's been saved, and those tags allow me to use this information and access it later on in my workflows more easily. So pretty key area of those change records. And the other thing is that it keeps a revision or a history of all those change records from the beginning, from when this project was created. And I can see who's changed them, when they were changed, and I can see the comments or reasons that the changes took place. I can also see the categorizations and tags that have been applied to it, so that I can filter and use this to extract information at my portfolio and reserves reconciliation levels. So another thing that we have with data flow is the ability to create different scenarios of a project, and these would be different views, either different development scenarios or different risking scenarios. In this case, we have a low, base, and high representation of this project. Now that's important because that allows us to submit more than one view of this asset into any portfolio analysis, and that ultimately creates more portfolio options and makes it easier for me to give different ways to describe this asset, and it's helping me as an asset manager interact with my corporate counterparts more effectively. So that's the data flow piece. We're going to move to another part of the PlanningSpace. We can use this navigation bar, and we're going to take a look at the economics and see how the advanced economic engine works in a little bit more detail. So simply switch workspaces, and I can see here I have a copy of that same data, and I can drill down and find my MacDuff project, and when I open that up, what I have is the same representation of that data, just in an analysis area where I can act as an analyst or an economist and do some additional analysis that's outside of the core portfolio data. And so here we see the same information presented in a slightly different way. We have some price information, same capital categories, operating costs, so it's linked in to what we saw previously. And when I hit calculate, I'm going to get a series of results and detailed reports that allow me to look at these results with more rigor. Here we see a summary report that have some really nice Excel charts and graphs from spreadsheets. And if we want to get more detail, we can get into the detailed corporate tax and supplemental tax calculations, be able to get in and understand how these things have been calculated. And I can easily send that to Excel to do some further analysis and checking of the results, should that be required. Yeah. Now, I'll switch into the admin part associated with economics and just show some additional capability that's been added for 16.1. In 15.2, we already had currency management, and so we were able to go through and define the exchange rates and inflation rates for a basket of currencies across the world. The Corresponding capabilities been added in 16.1 for price files. So here we can have a corporate price deck with multiple basket prices or marker prices and associated contract prices that could be defined using formulas based on those marker prices so that everything can be changed and kept correlated to the different scenarios. And here we see 3 scenarios defined. We could have any number of price scenarios. We've seen some companies that have up to 6 or more even these days with a lot of the price volatility that's happened in the past few years. So this is one of the key and most useful features of the PlanningSpace. It allows people to investigate the impact of regular changes in price on their portfolio and on their strategies and tactics. We'll come back into the data flow area for the next step. So we've seen the economics and the PlanningSpace economics engine. The same engine is used for financials as well. So here, if we wanted to take a slightly different view at a higher level within this portfolio, so we're at the country level, this template is quite different in its design in that it's designed to aggregate information from all of the projects below it. And in this case, it's bringing up economic cash flow information, aggregating it into key descriptive variables. Likewise, it's doing that for the proven reserves. And these are the raw materials that are needed for our DD&A calculations. And the resulting financial cash flow calculations will give me the information needed to generate my pro forma financial statements. So in this case, we see we've used the same engine, and we've chosen a financials regime. And when I calculate this, this will update all of that information, and I'll be able to see my profit and loss, balance sheet, and financial cash flow results. Now these can be reported via Excel or any other reporting mechanism, but these are core information that are associated with the reserves and the reserves booking. Okay, so we've seen data flow, we've seen economics, we've now seen the basics of financials in the PlanningSpace. We're going to move to another workspace, which is reserves. Now this is a really key workspace for us. This is one of the core strategies for Palantir to enable reserves workflows. And in this case, we see that we have multiple reporting standards that can be supported. NI 51 is Canadian, SEC is US, EIA is another version of the US standard. We support Russian, Australian, other international standards as well. And one of the key features of this tool is the ability to define those standards in a very custom way to make the reporting elements much more easy. So here we see some consolidations, but before we go into that area, we're going to look at another major feature that's been made available in version 16.1, and that's some of the more advanced decline capability. So here we see a collection of well level data focused on historical production data. I'm going to group this slightly by operator and county. And the well of interest that I have is one of the Devon wells in this county, Denton County. And as I bring this up, I see I have a decline analysis interface. On the bottom, this is the new version 16.1 interface for managing different segments of the different forecasts. So here we have oil, gas, water, condensate, NGL forecasts. These are primary forecasts. These remaining two are done based on ratios. And if I want to focus in on the results, we can see that we have nice history matching and curve fitting. The ratio forecasts are in the dotted lines. So we have really nice improved visualization to manage these traditional ARP style declines. We've added some standard charts that come out of the box, the rate time, traditional ARPS decline chart. Rate versus producing time is one that reflects the impact of downtime or shut-ins on a well's production and ultimate recoverable. There's rate cum curves that are used for the EUR determination. And now we start to get into some of the new techniques in charting, the Duong charting, which are suitable for unconventional wells, in particular forecasting the performance of unconventional wells in the face of limited information and data, so early stage production. And these are meant to be comparative and offset against the more traditional decline items. So that's the reserves evaluation side of the reserves space. We can go back to the reconciliation piece. And this is more of the analytical side. As we start to look at the bookings and the reserves and how they've changed, we can use this tool to reconcile, make sure that we have change reasons or explanations for all of the bookings that we have listed with this set of data. And this tool on the right is really an analytical tool. I can look at the top level of the hierarchy and I can see all of the different contributions to the change reasons for that reporting period. I can look at each reserve category and see its contribution and what's contributed to that change. And if I want to go into more detail, the analytical capability will change as I go through the different parts of the hierarchy. So if I find something out of balance, it's easy for me to find the project that's contributing that discrepancy and be able to address it. So if I wanted to see which projects were associated with the oil revisions, I can see those change deals. And here we see our McDuff project and an additional one, the Hill End project, that are contributing to that change. So the consolidation is very effective in terms of analytical tool supporting the reserves reconciliation process. The reserves is also very much about reporting, and we have an advanced reporting section, and we can create any sort of SEC or EIA reporting that's required. And there's a couple examples here that I'll open up. And so here we see a summary report, gives us some information for SEC. It's a high-level aggregate report that's suitable for a summary or a submission. If we want to get more detail, we can do a bigger report that has subgroups, and we can see that this is quite detailed and it's quite visual as well. So we'll move to page 25, and we'll start to see some input of some of these projects and how they've contributed to the change over the course of that reporting period. So again, advanced reporting, a key part of the reporting of the reserves workflow. The next step in our PlanningSpace journey is in the portfolio side of things. Switch to that workspace and we see that I can have a series of analyses files that are available to me. This one was prepared for today's webinar. And what this is it's loaded up data from the entire portfolio. It's brought in the metadata that really helps us describe and understand the impact at the portfolio level. And we have a number of visualizations that can be predefined and help us with the analysis of our portfolio. So in this case, one of the things our analyst has done is added some filters. So there's our unfiltered view. That's the entire portfolio put together. I can look at different parts and how they contribute on an individual basis. And I can see down to the country level. This is the UK. You can see that there's limited growth. It's really managing the decline, extending the life of the fields, and specifically the McDuff field that we looked at and what it looks like at a portfolio level. We have a number of visualizations available to us. Here we're looking at production rate on a project level. That may be too detailed. I can quickly and easily change these to get some more information. It's still pretty detailed. Maybe let's look at region. All right, and so again, this is part of the analysis process. Building these visualizations is a key thing that our analysts do as we go through, try to understand what our portfolio is capable of. We see that predominantly we're in onshore or shallow water, a few deep water projects. Moving on, we can look at the portfolio mix based on a country basis, on production, on capital spend, and eventually we get to targets. Now we're starting to look at how the portfolio responds to our corporate objectives and trying to investigate different scenarios that will meet those objectives. Before we do that, we'll touch on one key feature of 16.1, which is what we call mutually exclusive groups. Now this is a technique that allows us to load up more than one view of a given asset. Now this is really helpful because it means that we then have more options in our portfolio and we get more insight about which field development scenario fits better with our corporate objectives in our portfolio. And so here we see our McDuff project has had 2 different development scenarios submitted, and these radio buttons indicate that you can pick one or the other. They're mutually exclusive. Now we could have 6 different views of this asset, and it would still only select one view at any one time when looking at the portfolio. And one thing that's really interesting is which scenarios that a successful portfolio will pick. It's indicating which ones fit with your portfolio more effectively, and communicating back back to your asset teams allows them to focus on those field development scenarios that are going to be more successful for your organization. So let's investigate some of the portfolio optimization capability. We'll start with one that's pretty common. It's a rank and cut. We're going to add a little bit of complexity here in that we're going to blend the ranking based on value and reserves. We'll give a bit more weighting to the value, right? But we'll also make sure that we're cutting out any projects that are NPV negative. So we'll run that valuation and that optimization. You see some changes to my portfolio, and that's giving me a core project selection, economic projects. I see here that it's done a pretty good job of meeting my capital constraints, all right, but I've got some space in my exploration budget, and we'll see if we can address some of that. So I'm going to try to resource level and get my focus on exploration capital. We see that it's leveled that and it's pushed some of these projects forward, but what we see, the trade-off is that we've now gone over our capital development budget. Well, we can try to address that with this method. And we see that it's a relatively simple optimization method. We have a trade-off. We can only really focus on one constraint at a time. But still we get some reasonable value, just under 39 billion for the portfolio. Let's see if we can improve upon that. Well, the easiest way to do that and handle all of our constraints is to use the linear program optimization. And it's going to take all 3 constraints simultaneously, and it's also going to seek to maximize my indicator. In this case, it's value. We could pick any indicator, whether it's a ratio or reserves or any kind of scalar indicator. So let's run that. Now this type of optimization technique is the fastest and most efficient. It gets to the optimal solution very quickly in a few seconds. And when I apply that to my portfolio, I can see that indeed I've met my capital development constraint, I've met my production constraint. It's maximized value at just under 40 billion. And we see here that what this is telling me is that I can't use up all of my allocated capital exploration budget. So maybe I would want to look at that constraint and reduce my budget on spending, or maybe reallocate it somewhere else. Now, there's another technique that's interesting to use, and this one is a genetic algorithm, and it has some more relaxed constraints, and so we can test around this optimal outcome and see if there's some trade-offs that we can do to improve the value of the portfolio. So this is now searching around the optimal solution. It's relaxing some of the constraints, and we can see here that what it's telling us is we can actually improve our value with a modest breaking of a constraint. And we have to pay a penalty function for that. So we're not getting that for free, but it's telling us that there are some options. So we'll stop this. We'll apply that outcome. We see a slight shifting, and we can see immediately here that we've increased the value of the portfolio by 300 million to just over 40 billion. And right here, we can see that we do that by breaking the constraint in the first year. So very interesting result on that. And then we can start to investigate each of those scenarios and try to understand which projects contribute to that value. So we'll update the data, and we can see the spread of projects and how they relate to each other in a optimal sense. So that's the portfolio analysis piece. We've gone from the data flow through to economics, financials, reserves. This was just portfolio that we've just completed, and so far we've stayed within the PlanningSpace system. We haven't left the product at any time. So we're going to finish off with an example of how you might interact with the product from the PlanningSpace from a third-party system. And to do that, we're going to use Excel. Obviously, Excel is a key tool in most companies' planning workflows. And what I've done here is I've created what I consider sort of an engineering cost estimate sheet. I have a number of cost assumptions that are based on the production and reserves assumptions at the beginning. And what I can do is bring back in the data from the data flow project we were looking at. I do that by connecting to the server via the internet, so over a cloud type connector. When it connects into the system, it'll bring up the hierarchy that contains my project of interest. And there's McDuff. So I've selected my project. I want to make sure I bring in the project level data. And I'm able to choose the variables that I want to interact with. So we'll use some production variables initially. Capital variables are important to us. So we'll bring in a number of these. And you notice these are the same variables we saw in the data flow template earlier in the webinar. And we'll load them up. In a few seconds it'll bring back a table that I can then use and connect to the other formulas I've defined in this sheet. I've used a series of offset lookup commands that allow me to create a dynamic two-way workflow. So now when I've done my analysis in the Excel sheet, I can then send save the variables back to the data flow template, and I've created a very clever little subroutine here that allows me to manage my data using a third-party tool. Okay. So that's really all the features and the parts of the PlanningSpace that we had planned to show you for the webinar. We'll do a quick summary. So again, we started with data flow, economics, financials, reserves, portfolio. We showed all of these workspaces operating under the single application of the PlanningSpace. And specifically, we looked at the new navigation windows, the different ways to go back and forth between the different parts of PlanningSpace. Key feature for 16.1, the ability to include embedded Excel economic spreadsheets in data flow templates. We've seen the advanced economics calculations and how they can be used for advanced economic and financial forecasting, and how they can be used in conjunction with the Excel sheets. On the portfolio side, we saw mutually exclusive groups and their major impact in adding more option value into the portfolio analysis. And in reserves, we saw enhanced decline analysis, moving towards advanced type curve analysis, and also the reserves reconciliation capability. From the third-party perspective, we saw the PlanningSpace data app and how it can be connected into Excel and other Office tools to be able to communicate in a back and forth way from the PlanningSpace. Okay, well that's a wrap. Thank you everyone for your kind attention, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next webinar.